Reducing the PEL is important to keeping our younger generation of coal miners safe, but regulations won't be enough until there is some honesty. Honesty with samples, honesties with masks and respirators, honesty with how bad the epidemic truly is. I have worn several different types of masks while mining, anything that could keep me safe in my job. But I'm here to tell you it's difficult to do. We're just now finding out that the masks we wore weren't filtering out the dust what they were supposed to. They're failing us. When you are in 40 inches of coal and you're hunched over, the masks don't work too well. The heat, the sweat makes it almost impossible to breathe. Your body suffers from a physical labor of the job. This is me here, neck surgeries, back surgeries, knees, and shoulder surgeries. It adds up over time. You struggle to breathe when dust is all around you, but you've got everything else knowing, making your job even tougher. It feels like a pill is over your face and you can't get it off. In my time in the mines, I have worn personal dust monitors and have seen what operators do when inspectors visit. I want these companies to do better. I don't want them to shut down, but if you look at the production numbers on days when the inspectors visit and when they don't, you can tell they're gaming the system. To keep it honest, both operators and MSHA inspectors should conduct quarterly samples. Operators don't want to be over their limit, but they know how to keep miners afraid of speaking out. These are good paying jobs and no one wants to lose them. We've got families to take care of and support. And in many places down here, you don't have any other work. There needs to be a better way to keep your younger miners safe, keep business open without risking the next generation's health. The shortage of MSHA inspectors makes this even tougher. In my experience, MSHA would run samples on everyone, and sometimes they would just sample one group or another. But the thing about it is the only way for inspectors to see what goes on in these mines is if they were with them the entire shift. And I know that'd be tough. I mean, no doubt about it. And that's impossible. And what happens when the inspectors leave, no one wants to be honest about what's happening. And if they were, we wouldn't have this epidemic of black lung right now. Near the end of my time as a miner, I cut about 3,400 foot of slope for about 2 years, and this is pure silica rock. That was the third slope I had cut, and it was just straight silica all day. They couldn't run dust pumps, and we cut through solid rock to get to the coal seam. But because we hadn't hit coal yet, it wasn't considered a coal mines. That's when my health really began to decline. And in those years, I don't remember them doing any dust samples at all. I want this rule to be done right. I want the company inspectors to do the right and protect our miners. We old timers have already paid the price. We're going to die from this preventable disease, but we have got to take care of our younger guys. I've got a brother right now still in the mines, my baby brother. There's always room for improvement, and you should always do better. You'll never eliminate 100% of the dust because you can't pull out what you can't even see, and that's the killer, is the dust that you don't see. But until we have a rule in place that protects our miners, keep them employed, and eliminates fear and retaliation from these operators, it won't be enough. That's all I got.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Nice to see you.
This is Willie Dotson. The last name is, well, it's first and last, WILLIEDODSON. And I work as a Central Appalachian Field Coordinator for Appalachian Voices. Appalachian Voices is a nonprofit organization working for healthy communities and ecosystems and for a fair and just economy in Central and Southern Appalachia. Our membership is national, but it is primarily concentrated in the Appalachian states of Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina, where we also work with countless community partners who aren't necessarily members of our organization. Among them, the Black Lung Association we work pretty closely with. My work is based out of our Norton, Virginia office in the heart of Southwest Virginia's coal country. Around 2017, I began working with miners in our local chapter of the Black Lung Association, and eventually with other chapters and with the National Black Lung Association as well. From spending time with these individuals, I learned about the tragic impacts of black lung disease, and I became aware of the staggering statistics demonstrating the current epidemic of black lung affecting miners, particularly in Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Y'all don't need me to tell you that a vast body of evidence demonstrates a causal relationship between high levels of respirable silica and an increased occurrence of black lung disease. Thanks to peer-reviewed papers penned by researchers such as Dr. Robert Cohen and Dr. Go, who spoke earlier, as well as investigative reporting by Howard Burkus of NPR and other journalists, we know that black lung is now occurring at its highest level in decades, that it is affecting miners younger than it did in previous generations, and that the disease is more frequently occurring in its most severe form, progressive massive fibrosis or complicated black lung. As the agency responsible for seeing to the health and safety of miners, it is MSHA's responsibility to address this problem. I believe that this is the intent of MSHA in drafting this proposed rule, and I am deeply grateful for all the work that has gotten us to this point. However, there are serious deficiencies in the proposal that must be addressed for it to have any effect at all on the rates and severity of black lung disease in my home state of Virginia and across the region. Appalachian Voices supports the proposal to lower the permissible exposure limit for respirable silica from 100 to 50 micrograms per cubic meter. While there is no concentration at which exposure to respirable silica becomes necessarily safe, this limit, if properly enforced, would afford mine workers the same protections afforded to workers in any other industry. This is a long overdue change, and we are glad to see it in the proposed rule. As for the rule's deficiencies, I will name 4, and we'll be submitting written comments as well that go into a little bit more detail. And some of these are things that you, Ms. Sylvie, have been, engaging with other speakers and providing clarity on. So that may happen again, but I'll just make the point that we need clarity on these things in the final rule. As you put it, words matter. And so it's good that we're having this back and forth, but I still want to kind of hammer on these points, some of which have been brought up already. First, the rule relies primarily on operator-reported data, and it grants far too much discretion to mining companies as to when and, in fact, whether to sample for respirable silica dust. In order to base enforcement actions on accurate data, the final rule should establish that inspectors visit mines frequently without advance notice in order to directly collect silica samples. Further, these inspectors should remain on site collecting multiple samples and observing operations for the entirety of an 8 to 10 hour shift over numerous consecutive days. Otherwise, many miners who I've worked with will tell me how, it's pretty common practice for all the inspectors come in, let's put up the dust curtain, let's, do this, that, and the other, kind of make it look good. And then the inspector leaves and they just go back to running the coal as fast as they can, health and safety measures kind of out the window. Second, the proposal would allow mines that are found to be non-compliant with the 50 microgram standard to continue operating while temporarily relying on respirators worn by miners, ostensibly in order to protect them from inhalation of dangerous levels of silica dust. Use of this sort of personal protective equipment is not practical for many jobs and many aspects of constructing and operating a mine. The miners who my colleagues and I have spoken with about this inform us that these devices are ill-fitting, uncomfortable, and do not always even allow for the level of oxygen intake that is necessary while performing manual labor and breathing heavily. In addition, they cause goggles to fog up, which presents a safety issue, as this impairs a mine worker's awareness of his surroundings and his ability to communicate with his coworkers. In addition to concerns about the practicality of respirators in coal mines, this portion of the proposal also fails to clearly define the limits of temporary. In essence, this portion of the proposal appears to create a basis on which miners could be required to work in elevated and unsafe levels of a deadly substance indefinitely. The final rule, I don't believe that is MSHA's intention at all. The final rule should rectify this by providing that whenever a mining environment does not comply with the 50 microgram limit, workers should be withdrawn from that environment until better engineering and design controls can be implemented in order to bring respirable silica dust levels below 50 micrograms per meter. I think this notion of temporarily requiring miners to work in this dangerous environment is not the way to go. And the fact that temporary isn't clearly defined is shocking to me. Third, it is not clear to us that this proposal imposes any monetary fines against non-compliant operations, automatically. Without the ability to impose financial penalties, MSHA has no leverage to enforce the PEL. This is a very simple point. The final rule should impose fines against any mine with a silica concentration greater than 50 micrograms per cubic meter, and such fines should be high enough to compel diligent compliance with this limit. And the rule needs to be specific about this, either amounts or a specific way that the fine amounts will be calculated. I worry a lot when the rule, the policy that we all look to for the way a thing is going to happen has too much kind of discretion and wiggle room in it. Like we need to be able to fall back on policies, and those policies to be clear and specific. Finally, it is not clear to us how anything in the current proposal will ensure that respirable silica levels will be monitored and the PEL enforced during every aspect of mine work, including those activities that produce no coal. The final rule must provide this clarity. And again, I'll just emphasize that sentence because I know, Ms. Silva, you're having a back and forth with us about this exact point. The rule needs to provide the clarity. The final rule should require regular silica sampling throughout the entire life of a mine, regardless of coal production at any given point, and especially whenever miners might be exposed to excessively high levels, such as during the cutting of a slope. In summary, it's been a long road to get to where we are today. It's taken a lot of study and consideration by you all at MSHA, by medical scientists, journalists, miners, and their advocates. And we're at a critical point here. 10 or 20 years from now, we may look back on this process as the moment when MSHA modernized a set of regs and procedures, thus curbing the impacts of a devastating epidemic. If MSHA gets this right, fewer miners will have to give up their livelihoods, their health, and ultimately their lives due to a preventable disease. If MSHA gets this right, fewer families will have to reckon with the tragic premature death of a loved one. If MSHA gets this right, fewer papaws will have to explain to their grandbabies that they can't breathe well enough to play with them in the yard. That's something that miners talk about all the time, how heartbreaking it is to not be able to play with their grandkids. But if MSHA gets this wrong, we will look back on this process as its own sort of tragedy, a moment when we came close to doing right by coal miners, but ultimately failed them. We'll see no change in the rate of miners contracting black lung. We'll continue to see the most severe form of the disease impacting younger working people than in previous generations. Appalachian communities will continue to suffer. I trust and believe that you all here today and that the leadership of and other personnel within MSHA and the Department of Labor share my concern for miners with this awful disease. I ask that you take my feedback as to the deficiencies in this proposal into account in drafting the final rule, and I believe that you will. On behalf of Appalachian Voices members and the coal miners and their family members who spoke with me and my team as we prepared our comments and kind of navigated our position on what we're seeing in the rule, I thank you all for your time.
And thank you. And we will take your comments as well as comments of everybody here.
Come on. As soon as you get to this section, they go to the intake. Cheating the samples is what we need to stop. If we could stop this, we could save some lives. We need to crack down and make these men work for the 8-hour shift. And the 80% of the coal they have to produce during that session, when you get to 80%, the section shuts down. And we just need to keep track of these dust samples and put a stop to hiding them. If you read in the paper here 3 or 4 weeks ago, they caught a foreman and one of the men putting a dust sample in the box. And when I speak of this, people look at me like I'm stupid. I've got 30 years of coal mining. I know the tricks and how they operate. We just need to put a stop to it. We've got to stop them from hiding the pumps some way, somehow. And we could save some lives. Like me, it's too late for me. I had 30 years of it. But I'd like these young people to realize they need to wake up. And I talk to them all the time, and they won't listen. But one of these days, it'll be like me, you can't walk across the parking lot. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate what you're saying.
Thank you.
And, on a personal note, I want everybody here to understand. I thought, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good. Thank you.
My name is Vonda Robinson, and I'm the Vice President over the National Black Lung Association. I work a lot with the local in Southwest Virginia, the local chapters, work a lot with the senators and different things on different things to help the miners. I'm glad that MSHA, came out with this rule. I think it is a good rule, but I just feel like it needs to be more reinforced by MSHA and not the coal companies. With different miners that I've talked to and stuff, just with stories that they have told me that, the company will have the dust monitors there and they'll tell them to put them, somewhere like in a return or in their bucket or something like that. So they actually don't get the right sampling that they should. And I just feel like that if MSHA could maybe hire more people maybe to help, because I think a lot of the inspectors need to be there like around the clock, sort of to watch the coal mines, because you can look at the production. We've done a study where we've looked at the production when there's not been any inspectors there to inspectors there, and the co-production be half or less. And then if there's no inspectors there, they get really good coal, good runs and all that. But, we talked a couple of years ago, and, we was talking, you said, I think we'll have a good MSHA. I think you'll be happy. I was happy with it, but I just feel like that it needs to be reinforced by MSHA and not by the coal companies, because we've seen what's happened, and we're seeing guys that's actually in their 30s getting complicated black lung. And these guys have small children. And that just really upsets me, because I see where my husband's came in 9 years from working in the mines to totally disabled to oxygen, black lung. He worked on a lot of slopes and stuff to see what actually it's done to his life. And, even my granddaughter, she knows what black lung is. She's 5 years old. And she'll come and she'll say, does Papa need his oxygen? And she knows how to turn it on. She knows how to turn it up. She knows everything about it. And she's 5 years old. And she'll tell me, she'll say, Nana, I wish Papa didn't have black lung, because he can't get out and play with me. He can't run with me. And, I'll try to, explain to him that, Papa can't, honey. He gets out of wind. And then she'll say, Nana, I don't like that black lung. I said, I don't either, honey. I don't like to see the toll that it has on the men's lives. And now we're looking at guys, my husband's 57 now, but now we're looking at guys actually 32 and 34 years old get complicated black lung. And that tells you that there's something wrong with the coal companies. They're not doing what they say they're doing. They're hiding. And I just think if it's more reinforced by MSHA, if they could come in, and I know that would be a lot to have them to camp out with them for like 8 to 10 to 12 hours, but just see, and then look at the co-production that day, and then look at the co-production when nobody's there and see, because, you know, I see this disease and I see what it's taken a toll on our miners in, you know, Southwest Virginia and stuff, and younger guys. And I'm thinking, these guys are not even papaws yet. They still have small children. And I mean, it's sad. I mean, some of these guys are even dying at a young age, and it shouldn't be. You know, these guys go in and they give their total bodies, their lungs, their life and everything to go back in a hole to dig coal to help power America. And they give everything. And I just want, you know, MSHA to back it up and help them and say, hey, you know, we're going to take care of you guys. We're going to try our best to keep you from getting black lung, because we don't want this disease to keep going like it is and even get worse. And I think with you all doing a great job with the Silica, with the standards that you have, if we can just get MSHA to just reinforce it with your guys going in, and don't trust the coal companies to do the same thing, because we've seen what's happened with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Robinson. Let me ask you one thing.
To you folks and to meet folks here in the audience. I'm a journalist. I've been covering these issues. Well, I've been writing about coal miners for the past 2.5 years, and we're really delving into the issues with Silica, with the black lung crisis here, with everything that's been happening for the past year or so. I published a big investigation within these times in May. And I don't want to take up very much of your time, because there are folks here who've been working on this issue for decades, who have lived this, who are from here. I just wanted to come out and show my support for them and for this rule, and to just emphasize how important it is to address this crisis and do everything we can, whether it's through legislation or through public health measures or through what we're doing here right now today, to help stem this bleeding, to staunch the bleeding, because so many people are struggling, so many people are getting sick, younger people, people my age, people younger than me, and it shouldn't be happening, right? Like this is a preventable disease, it's a preventable situation. And I'm, you know, I got to see my grandfather choked to death, smothered to death, because he was a steel worker. He had mesothelioma. He spent years breathing in toxic, harmful material, and that ended up taking him from us way too soon. And I just want to ensure that no one else has to see that or live through that, to lose someone they love because of something that could have been prevented, that didn't need to happen, that only really happened because it took too long to implement a rule, or someone wanted to make more money. Someone wanted to work people faster and harder and longer to make sure they could line their pockets. I also want to emphasize to folks here that people are paying attention. You know, I live in Philly. I came out for this hearing, and there are lots of other people who are following this story and following your struggle, and people who care. And I'm just very glad that we're talking about this. I'm glad that Sam brought up all those brilliant points, because he knows so much about this. And I just hope that you all take into consideration everything that he said and everything that folks here today say, and that we get this done, and that we implement this rule, and then we make it better and better and better, to a point where no one here has to think about this disease and these issues anymore. But right now it's so important. And I'm just glad to lend my voice to the choir of folks, just encouraging you guys to get this rule going, do something to help these folks, and make sure that no one else has to live or die the way that so many already have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I read your article, so thank you. Our next speaker,
Administration and Assistant Secretary Williamson. that is the political leadership of this agency, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, must be enthusiastically commended for their action to implement NIOSH's 1974 recommended exposure limit for silica dust in American mines. MSHA could have saved the lives of thousands of miners if they had done this decades ago. The proposed rule represents an improvement for metal and non-metal miners in many respects. However, there are three highly significant failings in the proposed rule, specifically of concern to underground miners. First, the rule requires no routine sampling. Second, it requires no specified penalties for violating the dust limit. And third, it provides no immediate protections for miners who are overexposed. As you noted in your remarks, Ms. Sylvie, it requires, in fact, for the first time ever under the Mine Act, this rule would require miners to wear respirators and continue working in conditions that MSHA knows are dangerous to the health of those miners. This rule also departs from the current reduced dust standard that does protect miners in some measure from silica exposures. So the only protections against silica dust, once this rule is implemented, are those provided by this rule. This final rule, when it issues, must apply the precautionary principle. That is, when you know of significant hazards to human health, this agency must err on the side of protecting the health of those individuals. Others will testify about the crisis of silicosis that is affecting miners across this country. That has happened because MSHA and this industry have allowed miners to work in dangerously high amounts of silica, including by letting those miners work in return air, specifically in southern West Virginia, in the Pineville office, in eastern Kentucky for many years now. Those miners who are mining predominantly sandstone in many cases have been permitted by MSHA and by this industry to work in dangerously high amounts of silica. And I represent miners in their 30s and in their 40s and in their early 50s who have severe progressive massive fibrosis and silicosis, who have lost over a quarter of their lung to rock dust. Their lungs have turned to rock dust. They have category B progressive massive fibrosis because of those exposures. So we have a crisis, and the rule does not capture that, and I'll go in a little bit more into that, and I want to be mindful of my time, so I'm going to move on. As to the first concern, the proposed rule requires no routine sampling. The one-time baseline sampling is not clearly defined. Will this be 5 consecutive shift samples? What is required of that initial baseline sampling? That's not made clear in this rule. Is it a one-shift sample? That needs to be clarified in the final rule. Because as the rule is written, it could be the case that mine operators can sample on one shift and demonstrate that they are not currently in violation and then never have to sample for silica again. The proposed rule creates an interesting concept of this periodic evaluation, but it places all the discretion in the hands of the mine operator as to whether or not to sample periodically pursuant to those evaluations. If mine operators wanted to willingly sample for silica dust, they would have been doing that for the last several decades. If mine operators wanted to sample for silica dust, they would not have been cheating and defrauding this agency out of the dust samples hundreds of times over decades, placing the discretion about whether to sample in the hands of the mine operators will not achieve the goal of reducing silica exposure. And as to something I know was raised in the last hearing, construction work. I am advocating, and I will submit a comment to this effect in the record, that MSHA should adopt a plan-based approach to mandatory periodic sampling. Proposed rule section 60, part 60, section 12E allocates authority to the operator to decide whether miners can be exposed to high silica. And then at section 12, subsection D, the proposed rule requires these operators to conduct semi-annual evaluation of the silica exposure. The operator should submit this evaluation to MSHA as a part of the operator's ventilation plan. This semi-annual evaluation should be posted at the mine site like any ventilation plan amendments so that miners in the union can review it and comment before it's submitted to MSHA. And then MSHA should assess, not the operator, but MSHA under this rule should be the entity with the discretion to assess whether to require periodic sampling conducted by the operator. And the requirement for sampling should be placed in the ventilation plan so that if an operator is mining through silica and is required by their ventilation plan to sample, and they are later found not to be sampling, MSHA can issue a knowing and willful citation for failing to implement the ventilation plan. That would be an enforcement mechanism, and this rule should contain that type of enforcement mechanism. Specifically regarding construction work, the ventilation plans should require periodic sampling during any phases of construction work because miners are exposed to sandstone during construction work, and then if the operator didn't sample during that construction work, potential knowing and willful citation of the ventilation plan. That would be an enforcement mechanism for this standard. The proposed rule does not specify penalties, unlike the 2014 coal dust rule, which goes to great length to establish criteria and thresholds about how many documented citations will serve as the predicate for citing operators for violating the rule. There is no such structure in this rule. Section 13 of Part 60 does provide for mandatory corrective actions, but there is no indication MSHA will actually assess or propose the assessment of a monetary penalty. A rule with no penalties is no rule at all. The only thing that mining companies understand is money. They don't understand or appreciate the blood and the lives of miners, because if they did, they would have protected miners willingly over the last several decades. This rule must specifically set forth the criteria for issuing citations, and the agency must express in the final rule its intention to issue citations with monetary penalties for the violation of this rule. Simply asking an operator to implement a corrective action will not lower actual exposure to silica. And so I'm referring to section 13 of the proposed rule there. Another aspect of enforcement, as I mentioned, would be placing this in the ventilation plans. Lastly, there are no immediate protections for miners. Section 14 of Part 60 does provide relevant language that you could just adopt. You should not mandate the use of respirators. Respirators don't work reliably in confined hot underground spaces, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that, but you should just keep the part of Section 14 that says we'll withdraw miners when the silica conditions are too high. That won't take long. It's administratively feasible. You'll hear that from other miners. I want to pass on because one of my clients is waiting on a lung transplant today. He was placed on the short list, thank God for that. And he is a young miner with severe progressive massive fibrosis, but his voice is missing here today. And he wanted to make the point MSHA should also quit placing return air entries directly next to the mine offices, because highly dusty silica air comes out in close quarters on Central Appalachian coal mines right into the surface area of the mines, and a lot of surface workers are overexposed to silica. MSHA does never sample those folks for silica exposure. And finally, this final rule should have no loopholes, fudge factors, or wiggle room. This rule must err on the side of safety by requiring routine sampling, by clearly imposing specific monetary penalties, by withdrawing miners instead of requiring respirators. I hope you will take these comments to heart, and I will submit all of these points on the record. I would also just note that the sampling that is provided in Table 4-5 at the Federal Register, Volume 88, page 44,868, does not include environmental samples. This is another real key deficit in this rule. This rule only when periodic sampling will happen under this rule, it only requires occupational sampling, not area sampling, not designated area sampling. And the preamble to the proposed rule does not assess the rate of violations of area samples. And that should be in the final rule too, because if you're going to fail to require it as area sampling, you should at least provide an assessment of what has been the experience of violations for area sampling. And that's missing from the proposed rule. And you should require area sampling as part of the periodic sampling. And when this rule is finalized, I thank Assistant Secretary Williamson and President Biden and the leadership of the Department of Labor for taking this important step. And I hope and pray that they will assure this agency includes in the final rule some measures that will actually reduce silica exposure for the thousands of American miners who are dying right now because MSHA has failed to do this for so long. Thank you.
Sam, I have a few comments for you, if you don't mind.
Yes, Ms. Sylvie.
First of all, I appreciate your testimony. And as with all testimony, I'm sure we'll take that into consideration. I want to again reiterate the clarifying comments that I made, and I know you heard them.
Yes.
Which you noted. Two things I want to note, and I want to note this for everybody in the audience, all stakeholders, everybody here now, that we all know the Mine Act itself is remedial legislation. And by that, what do I mean? The aim of the Mine Act itself, whether it be a safety hazard or a health hazard, is to prevent the hazard before it occurs. That's our goal. That's all of our goal.
Because of black lung. I appreciate y'all doing what you're doing with this silica because we need it. I know this is a start and I appreciate that. But I'm looking at when Joe Main was there, we ended up getting the dust sample down to 1 point something. And I know we got to have a starting point. So I can see this being a starting point. But when we let the company control this, then we really hurting because they get to make the decision. And I'm gonna give you examples. When I was in there, they told us if we get bad samples that they'd be shutting the mines down or we can't keep it. And we doing stuff to keep from getting bad samples. And then even when we have inspectors coming, well, we know the inspector can be the whole shift, so about 12 o'clock they would go out. Well, when the inspector left, they come and collect all the dust samples and come and put them over in the intake. So really, you ain't getting what you need to be done. And I give you, let me tell you, I grew up in a coal camp. I know everything about coal, man. We knock boxcar just to get the coal out the Curtis house to burn coal. So I've been around coal all my whole life. And I want to see something done about younger coal miners. It's bad when you at 35 years old and you can't work no more. I was at 48 when I couldn't work no more. To see my wife go out my house and doing what I'm supposed to be doing, I still have a hard time with that. And just think of these younger men, they'll be going through the same thing. And see, when we let the coal companies do it, they always got a way to get behind it. Like say, even the new dust samples they got out there, they know how to get away from around that. If you don't put it on every miner and have them doing the same at the same time, they know how to trick. If you just put it on the miner operator, guess what they do? They put the miner operator because they got a remote control. They put him back in the air, but you still got the two buggy boys. Then you got the, if you don't put it on the boatmen's, they over in the return because the dust going across section. They say supposed to be there one time a shift. But they're there almost the whole shift. And we can fix this when we start making the coal miners the coal companies responsible for what they're doing. Our bigger problem is, and I don't blame the coal miner, but I blame us too. I blame the coal miner, the coal, us. Because if we would speak up, but most time we won't speak up, we're scared. We heard about the law that if the federal government coming, guess what? If you ain't got nobody to represent you, hey, you ain't gonna go out there and say, hey, we all this stuff's coming in, and we don't know what to do about it. Because we know they'll get rid of us. I had people tell me that say, hey, we'll shut this mine down just to get rid of you. If they shut it down, how don't help you? Because you can't get hired at the other place. So our thing is that we need to make sure that we don't let the company do what they're doing. Like say, they know every trick in the book. And like say, if you let them give a sample, guess what? They can get to one else and say, well, I want you to stay in the intake all day long. So you really ain't getting an accurate of what's going on. And even when the federal government is there to give them, if they ain't up there to watch them the whole day, and I tell you what, we can fix that by, if you go back and look at the coal production, all the inspector have to do is come in and see what that coal production that whole week. If they come in on Friday, if you see the program, if they run 300 or 400 foot a shift, then all of a sudden they come in with the dust sample, we run 50 foot, then you know they setting up for that y'all get good samples. So that's what we need to make sure that the companies don't get to do that. And like I said, I wish the coal miners, us, that we would come forward, but we scared. And I tell you, I got brothers right there. I got a brother still in the mine. Don't you know he's scared to take an X-ray because he's scared what the company would do for him? So that's what I'm saying. When you scared, because you're looking at this is my livelihood. And when it's something in your livelihood, you do everything that you can to make sure that your family is provided with. So I appreciate what y'all doing because I know this is a starting point. But if we don't put something to keep the coal company from just every time, like say, if they don't have to worry about the dust samplers, and like say, they can always give you a dust sample that'll come out good. I mean, when I worked for Westmoreland, it's a union mine. And I tell you what, the company was doing their own dust sample, because what, when they come out, they were shaking them out and doing things. When they send them off to somewhere, get them checked, they was coming back good. And I tell you what, make a difference. When I was in a union mine, guess what? We had representation. If something was going on, guess what? We can go to the union rep at that mine. Guess what? They would stop it because the whole mine was coming. But in a non-union mine, you ain't got no representation. When they tell you they don't get rid of you, guess what? They don't get rid of you. So we need to do something to make sure that when they want to come forward about what's going on, okay, it's too much silica. If they can go to somebody and tell them that, and that the government need to come in and do something, okay, I guarantee a change. And I know that y'all can't do that. Y'all got to cut in pay. So y'all can't hire new federal mine inspector. You got a lot of coal inspector return. And when you ain't got the money to come in to hire more coal inspectors, it'll make it even harder to go out and even inspect with less money. And another thing on top of that, we need, when you get inspected, they need to be coal miners because they know all the ins and outs, what's going on. If you hire somebody on the street, you'll be teaching them what they got to learn. Where the coal miners already know what to do about it. They know what the company is doing, how the coal coming in. And when they come in, they know what they got to do to fix it. They know what to do to stop it. So that's what we need today is somebody that could be helping the coal miner, us. See, because we the last thing on the what get me so mad? We heard the coal company say, we keep the light on. Guess what? It ain't the coal company keeping it on. It's the coal miners. We don't heard nothing about the coal miners. You know, when I was working, they told us, we got somebody to replace you. You mess up, guess what? We ship you on down the road. And it may not be the minute right now, but this what the coal miners got to worry about. That, hey, if I go complain about something, they say they got somebody taking my place. So if we don't fix that, You never get a coal miner to come in up to complain about what's going on in the mine because he don't want to lose his job when he's taking care of his family. So that's why I'm here today. Hey, I appreciate what y'all doing right now. Like I say, this is a beginning. The same thing with Black Lung. It was a beginning. And look how much we're done right now. And just what we need with the Silica standard, we need the stuff to start being done now. See, because every day a coal miner is eating that silica or eating that dust, guess what? We'll have more people out here just in the hospital. And you'll have less, I'll tell you what, we got less coal miners than there ever been. Because nobody don't want to go in there no more. But they see the money. See, I'm telling you what, all our young people, all they see is money. They don't, I'm the same way. I know that's where the money was at. So that's why I didn't think I ever get Black Lung. And see, that most young people don't think, hey, I ain't gonna get that. But guess what? Once you realize reality, guess what happened? I got it. Now I'm dealing with it. I got a grandson. He won't go work at the mines out by. And I'm thinking, it just is worse out by as inside the mine. I want to talk him out of it, but guess what? When you make up your mind that you want to do something, it's hard for parents, grandparents to talk you out of doing something. I wish he'd go back to college, but that's where he don't want to go there. He looking at where the money is. And guess what? That's almost all our young people is looking where the money is. And guess what? It's in the coal industry. It ain't too much stuff around here in West Virginia that you'll make $40-some an hour, $20-some an hour. It ain't nothing that you'll make that kind of money. So we need something to make sure they don't get what I got. I appreciate what y'all is here to do, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison, and thank you all.